Hi, Michael.
Hi, Emily.
Welcome back to the kitchen table again.
Here we are.
We just recorded an episode with Jack Hutchinson, director of Hutchinson Builders. But before we go on with that, we firstly just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're recording today, which is the Turrbal and Jagera people, and pay our respects to the elders, both past, present, and emerging. In our episode with Jack today, we talked about a broad range of topics, general issues that every party in the construction industry is facing right now, what Hutchies are doing in the modular construction space, and some of the solutions that modular construction can help solve, and much more. What was your favourite part of the episode?
I think my favourite part was the open and respectful but candid commentary around issues that all parties in the construction industry are facing: subcontractors, suppliers, builders like Hutchies, principal clients, and the role of banks. Or financiers. So it's just so important that conversations like this take place, that where someone like Jack, on behalf of his company, can express the concerns or the challenges that they are facing, but also acknowledging that everybody else is facing challenges too. So, yeah, great conversation.
I agree. Let's jump in. Welcome, Jack, to our kitchen table. Thank you for joining us on the Deconstruction series.
Thanks very much for having me.
So to kick off the episode, we're asking everyone who they are. You're Jack Hutchinson, and I think that you'd have to be under a rock not to recognize Hutchinson Builders. So do you want to give a bit of a description of who is Jack? What is your career pathway to date, and what your role is at Hutchies at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emily. So Jack Hutchinson, I'm a director at Hutchies. It wasn't always this big of a beast. Like you say, you'd be hard to miss it now, but growing up, it was really a Queensland business. I think as a teenager or before then, we turned over about 100 million, had 100 staff, now 2.7 billion and 1,800 staff. So it was really the Greg Quinn era from 2003 to now that took it to where it is now. My own career path, I'm a quantity surveyor by trade, so did the construction management and QS course at Bond, then went and worked down in Sydney for a firm called Slattery, so consulting QS firm. Came back to Hutchies, worked as a cost planner, contract admin, so ran a job, and before that was tendering on jobs. Then went and did an MBA in London and at London Business School, worked for a builder over there, and now coming back in a central directorship role. So less tendering or running jobs and more overseeing the business, public facing stuff. I guess preparing for the chairmanship when the old man's finally had enough.
That's a while off, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I'm not rushing either. But that's always been, I guess I should clarify that. So we've had a succession from Greg Quinn to Russell Fryer, and Paul Hart appointed in the COO role. So my succession plan's always been for the chairmanship rather than the managing director role or CEO role. So that's always been my goal, is first get my own profession as a QS, understand the industry. But long term, the grooming process has always been towards the chairmanship. But no rush at all. It'll happen when it happens.
Yeah, I like on your website how they have the background, a bit of a timeline, and all the photos of how everything came to be. It's quite special.
Yeah, no, we're good storytellers, I think. Well, Dad was always good at that. He dug up our history, and I think he sort of, worked out when the company was established in 1912 and went through the records to I guess tell the story, and speaking with his grandfather. And then Harley, our comms manager's really good at laying it out visually. So thank you. I think it's something we're pretty strong at, is telling our history.
Yeah, I think it's good. People can relate and see where things have come from.
Yep.
And so at the moment, are you doing a lot of, articles or speaking positions?
Yeah, it's a mix. So all internally, there's a bunch of forums where I have my voice, whether it's board meeting, budget meeting. So once a month, every team. So there's 26 construction teams within Hutchies. We're quite a decentralized business. They all have a lot of autonomy, so they hire their own people, win their own work, manage their own relationships with subbies. But yeah, once a month, they all report on the financial and program position of their jobs. So that's one forum. Then we have project allocation meeting, which is Russell, Hardy, Paul David, our BDM and I. Board meetings. So internally, there's controls, which I'm a part of to help steer the direction of the company. And then, being out in the market, meeting with clients. It differs day to day. It's a lot different to running a job where you show up or cost mining is even more probably predictable, where you show up, you measure, you get quotes and you put a number together. Whereas my job now is pretty varied.
I like a lot of variation. One of the articles that you published and you wrote on modular construction in the age of shortages was in the Urban Developer, and you shared that last week. And before I read it, I knew what modular construction was, but I definitely had to tap Michael on the shoulder and ask him, because I was under the impression that modular construction was just temporary. So when I was reading your article, I was thinking, oh, hang on a second, like, what is this? And Michael and I were talking about it. So do you want to maybe expand on what your viewpoint of in the article and why modular construction can be so important as an area that builders focus on now?
Yeah, sure. So we got into it in the late 2000s, I think, sort of on the back of the mining boom. So we were building mining camps, basically, modular houses for miners to live in Mooroombah, so in the Bowen Basin, and then even out in WA in the Pilbara. So I guess that was our entry into modular, and we procured a big site in Yatala. I think it's about 10,000 square meters, where we also had our crane yard. So that was our start into it. And then I guess from there, we did a lot of work with DEET, so the Department of Education in Queensland, where they have certain school rollouts, and often with budgets and timelines, they need them quite quickly. So we were able to respond quite quickly to their needs for classrooms and admin buildings, various school buildings. I guess where it's picked up recently is the post-COVID economy, where there's been, basically when everything was paused, it meant a lot of jobs were paused. Things were then restarted with a lot of fiscal policy, a lot of monetary policy, so bringing interest rates to zero, and schemes like Home Builder Scheme, and basically that just turbocharged the whole construction sector, which is sort of where we've got to now with runaway inflation, or escalation we call it in our industry. And basically what that meant is it's very hard to get trades on site. We've also had a period of really bad weather. So there's been a far bigger shift from mostly government agencies or departments towards needing things quickly. So we're seeing a lot more regional Queensland health work in the modular space, a lot more schools. And I guess probably the biggest change is social housing. So it's probably the biggest story in the country at the moment is the housing shortage. And one way to deal with it is for the government to step in and start to build housing themselves rather than let the private sector deal with it, which I think, the private sector does a good job, but construction prices have gone up, say, 30% in 2 years. And it's meant that I don't think sales revenues have kept up with that, meaning the price that people buy units, I don't think has kept up. So it's meant that now a lot of residential jobs are struggling to get off the ground. And the only people who can really make a deal stack is, sort of high-end developments or developments with scale, or probably build to rent. I think we're going to see some asset managers come in and build to rent. But probably in the modular space, social housing, I see all this regional land and government stepping in and rolling out big packages of social housing throughout the country, or throughout the state in particular.
Michael's just brought up on the board.
Yeah.
You've got a few examples on your website, very impressive website, of your yards where you build your modular construction, and this Lismore temporary housing. It's definitely impressive, and as you've said in your article, you said that there's a donga stigma about limited quality. But when you're looking at some of these, they look very impressive. There's certainly no donga feel in the modular constructions that are in the videos.
Yeah, so Lismore is temporary. So I think that the life cycle of that precinct is, I think, 5 years. So that one, is a response to an emergency that was on the back of the floods. And as were the quarantine facilities that we built, subbing to Multiplex or to the Wagner Group. So they are genuinely temporary. But I guess when I said the donga stigma, I think some people still see modular as a demountable little shed.
Well, that's what I thought.
which isn't really fair on what can be done. There's no real limit to the quality of finishes that can be built. I think having an efficient design that can be replicated helps, and that's the whole, I guess, philosophy behind modular, is that it's more industrialized, or it's more like a factory. But as far as quality of finishes and what you can build, it's not that limited. Obviously, you're limited to how high you can build, although there are high-rise modular methods too. But as far as building long-term housing for the country, there's no reason why modular can't fill that gap.
Have you, where do Hutchies see you using modular? Are you planning to expand on it, or maybe are you going to go modular on some projects that might not have necessarily been considering that option in the past?
Yeah, I think at the moment it's just being driven by demand. So a lot of regional hospitals and a lot of schools. We've also just set up in Newcastle in New South Wales to hopefully build for health infrastructure or New South Wales education too. So we're definitely expanding on the back of government works. We've been building that style for a while. I think the projects are getting a bit bigger. We're seeing multi-story health buildings or multi-story school projects now. We have done high-rise modular in that we've done bathroom pods before. That's probably not, that probably hasn't taken off as much as some probably thought. So basically you build a bathroom prefabricated on site, you wrap it up, and then it gets craned into a high-rise and dropped into the where bathrooms were. And I think that's a useful construction method. It just needs a lot of repetition. It needs similar floor plates for it to be feasible. But as far as expansion, it's going to become a bigger part of our book. And I think it's just on the back of more health, more schools, and now this new sector, social housing.
Seems like
the workplace health and safety benefits for the workers must be. Yeah. Have you done any sort of data, or got any data available in terms of following up on the reduced incidence of issues on site? Because you're not actually on site, you're in a controlled environment, aren't you? Yeah.
I'd have to ask our safety manager, but I've never heard of a major incident in our yard, so I suspect the incidents are very low. It's all typically you're on the ground, so there's not that fall from heights risk. Typically you've got a safety manager walking the yard like a factory, and you get into a flow. So I'd expect it is a lot safer. And then I guess the other benefit people talk about is the quality management. Before it leaves the yard, you can do far better auditing than perhaps on site, where you're pushing a program, there's a large area to cover, and often we're coming back to fix mistakes rather than getting it right the first time.
And you've got the trades backing up behind you on site, and all that sort of pressure that goes with that. It's far more controlled offsite, isn't it, when it comes to all of this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that'll be an interesting space to watch. I'll be looking out if you do any more articles. If they follow you out. I on the article train. Yep. We're also talking to you pre-recording about how with the labor shortages and kind of the tough market of insolvency of some subbies, Hutchies has looked to bring people in-house for their trades, and particularly in this career mail article I'm looking at, the form workers. Is that like, how does that change operations for you, and are there any challenges with that?
Yeah, there's certainly challenges. There's more people on your books, firstly. Bigger payroll, bigger risk as far as us managing that labor force to make sure it's productive, whereas historically head contractors sold that risk down to the subcontractors and it became their problem. I guess, the reason we're doing it is not it's not a strategic decision as much as dealing with the reality of the market. So we had a major form worker go into administration on our job. When a subby goes bust on your job, you've got two options: either get another subby in to finish it off, which is typically costly, or self-perform or do it yourself. And in this case, we decided to take those guys onto our books, and we basically formed our own formwork business now that will operate across probably 4 jobs. So it's not as if we're performing all formwork ourselves, but a few major jobs will be self-performing.
So you're sort of picking and choosing or prioritizing the jobs in which you might just have to use in-house formwork.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends, we have great relationships with formwork subcontractors out there. It depends on their capacity and who can do what job at what time. But I think we're doing a good job at it so far. We did one job in Melbourne where we self-performed formwork before, so we have done it in the past. It's a reaction to, we had this terrible rain throughout 2021. If you think about formwork as a trade or a business, they're never undercover. So they have guys showing up to site, it raining, sitting in the site sheds. They're still getting paid their wages for a period. But as far as a business owner, you're not getting any productivity. So there were losses that were carried forward from that bad weather, and then throw in other inflationary things like upward pressure on labor costs, upward pressure on materials costs. So there was a lot of pain in that trade in particular. It's not the only trade though. We're self-performing a little bit of joinery. We've always had some other trades on our books, but I think it's expanding just as a result of insolvencies out there in the subcontractor market.
So it's more of a short-term strategic decision, and you'll sort of revisit it.
Yeah, it is. It's short-term, but I can't see if it's success. I can't see us stopping it. So we have 200 form workers, I think, on our books now, and I imagine we'll want to keep them going from project to project rather than have to deal with just doing one job and then. It's quite costly to wind that up after just one job. So I think we'll continue with it unless we fail at it. But I can't see that being the case. I think we've got a really good, we've also taken on some of their managers. So not just formwork carpenters, but also their foremen or site managers on there. And so, if we make a success out of it, I think it'll be one for the future, but it's just making sure that we plan when you have 200 new people on your book, you need a plan. Okay, when this job finishes, this job starts.
Where they're going to go.
So you don't have this carry, these holding fees, I guess.
It's a significant amount of people. Before I forget, I was going to say the wet weather is probably a bit of a plug to the modular.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I didn't even mention that. Yeah, so in a facility in Toowoomba and Yatala, basically we have a big shed that's undercover. There's some works that are done outside, but a lot more can be done without the weather risk. And weather's been a killer the past in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, mostly Sydney and Brisbane, and regional Queensland. It costs a fortune. Most contracts historically have not allowed. Sometimes you get EOTs, which means we have our PC date pushed out, or practical completion date pushed out, which means we have less LD risk, with very rare, liquidated damages, using a lot of acronyms. But very rarely have we been paid compensable causes of delay, meaning our direct costs, our prelims, everything that happens when all our costs that keep ticking, but we're not getting any productivity for. Builders have just had to wear that. And that's been a big part of this insolvency. COVID, escalation, but the other killer has been the weather. So modular deals with that pretty well.
Yeah. Good solution.
Every time time moves, there's always a potential money issue, isn't there?
Exactly. Oh, time is money. Yeah.
Time is
So if
money.
you think about, like, our salaries don't stop. Our crane's still up there. That hire doesn't stop. So costs keep ticking. Even if you're not, even if your practical completion date has been pushed out, your direct costs, your preliminaries keep ticking.
And you still got to justify the variation.
Yeah.
Changes, and it just becomes an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think builders now are pushing back more on head contracts to get weather as a compensable cause of delay. But yeah, it's a battle. As a financier, when you're lending on construction finance, you want your costs set. You don't want to know that the developer's contingency could blow out because of all these risk factors. So I think it's a mindset shift for both developers and the lending market, the financiers, to accept that builders aren't going to take this risk anymore, I hope. So if you want to fund a job, or you want a job to go ahead, these are the new rules of the game. And if that means less jobs go ahead, then the question leads to, well, are we going to get deeper into this housing crisis? And yes, it's an interesting time. Sorry, I didn't mean to stray too much. But
no, I guess when it comes to sort of redefining the role of the lender or the banks at the moment, do you think that they're, say, if you want to finance a job, is there more scrutiny at the moment with how much you can get? I mean, is that a challenge?
Yeah, so we're not really developers, so we're not borrowing senior debt so it's really our clients' issue to get their finance. I think there's more scrutiny from financiers than ever on developers on which builder they're using, which favors us because we have a balance sheet or an equity position of 380 million. We're secure, so it means more work's coming to us. Unfortunately, we can't service it all, so we're having to say no more than ever. So that's probably the biggest change, is that they really focus on the builder's balance sheet. But again, historically, the industry norm in construction has been designing, especially in major projects, has been design and construct contracts, fixed price, lock a builder away, and then as a financier, I'm lending to a developer for that to fund that construction. And I know roughly that's there's going to be some variations along the way, but the amount I'm lending is pretty set. I think now what banks and non-bank lenders have to get their head around is accepting a bit more variance in costs and a bit more risk back onto the developer, which means their debt is a little bit more at risk. Because I think an even bigger risk for a financier or a developer is to have a builder go broke on your job. And one way is to get a secure builder, which is the way they're trying to deal with it. Unfortunately, we can't build everything. So I think they need to get their heads around taking a little more risk or lending on slightly lower development margins.
Yeah, it's interesting. We play a very broad role when it comes to not just legal services, but compliance services. So we've got a specialised compliance sort of division, of which I'm one of the directors, and got another director, David Cale, who used to be the CFO of McNabb. So he works with myself and Janelle Keris. So we've got a lawyer, a regulator, or person from a regulatory background, me, and experienced CFO. It's interesting that the challenges for the builders are now so great that it's almost an advantage to go to the principal and say, we've got to renegotiate these terms because it's going to hurt you much more if the builder can't complete the job. If you've got to retender, it's going to cost you much more to complete this job. So let's go back and revisit what's been paid for so far, and let's also potentially work on open book and things like that. And the response has been quite satisfying.
Yeah, that's good.
But it's almost like that the position is so bad for the builder that the principals realise that they've got to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah,
to bring the job finished. And then sitting behind that is obviously the principal then is trying to juggle the challenges of the finance So it's sort of, it's like the risk has been pushed back upwards again. It's sort of,
It is, yeah. I think it had to happen though. I think even before COVID, there's been a systematic, as far as I understand it anyway, I know I'm quite young, but a systematic push of risk downstream over the past 30 years. And I think COVID, which if you're a competent builder, you could sort of manage. And there is opportunity in fixed price D&C contracting too. If we have wins along the way, often that's opportunity for us. But we were never dealing in a 15% year on year inflationary environment, which is what's been going on since post-COVID. So you could hold your number for 6 months as the developer got their pre-sales before the job got away. You could, you could be digging a hole for 4 months before you let your structures package, and it didn't make a difference. The subbies held their number. What's changed is basically a hyperinflationary environment where numbers are constantly moving, and it's just not fair to leave that with the builder to deal with. So I think as builders, we need to hold our own more. And if that means that a funder or a client can't get their head around those terms, then the job just doesn't go ahead. Sorry, we're not going to be bullied into doing something that puts us at risk.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, that's something that Michael and I think that everyone would take their hat off to Hutchies was being very transparent and probably as open book as you can be with what's going on in the business and the challenges faced, and always publishing the accounts on the website to be very clear, very transparent with everyone. And we were also talking before we started recording about how your dad Scott is very open with articles and the Courier Mail, and just letting everyone know what's happening. And in an article this week, he's come out and said, just with how tough times are at the moment, Hutchies won't make a profit this year. It's pretty extraordinary how much money can run through a business, but because of all the issues and more that we haven't spoken about in this episode, that at the end of the day it's pretty slim margin what's coming out.
I think Dad was once quoted in the Fin Review as always called a journalist's dream. When they call him, he's always open. But that is our approach, and that is our culture in the business. I think we're going to make a tiny profit. So on 2.7 billion, I think we're forecasting 8, 9, 10 million. So he's right in principle that it's basically a break-even year, which is better than going backwards. A lot of people have lost money. So relative to the market, I think we outperformed our peers, but it's not a good year. It's crazy that you do all that work to basically stand still. I'm sure, we're not the only industry that has this issue. I know I've heard stories of farmers basically working to make a loss at times, but it's quite demoralizing when, you've got 1,800 people, you're delivering 150 jobs, turning over 3 billion almost. And at the end of the year, you're back, you're where you started. But that's just been the reality of the market. So subby insolvencies has probably cut 20 million off where we should be. And that's not really due to any fault of our own. It's just the reality of a subcontractor going broke on your job. How do we deal with this? Whether it's getting someone else in to finish it or taking people onto your own books, that both have a cost. There are historic losses just from projects that we won in 21. And since then,
the legacy, the pre-COVID legacy.
Exactly. Contracts. Well, 21 was post-COVID, but pre-runaway inflation. So I think things really got heated in about mid-21. But because construction takes such a long time, jobs we won then are still under construction. So, and in the period from us signing the contract to now, costs have probably gone up 25% ish. Yeah, maybe even more. There have been subcontractors who gave us a price at tender time. That price formed the basis of our head contract. We haven't gone to sign up their subcontract until a year later. they've said, I cannot do it for that anymore because my costs have risen. And basically that hit has been on us. So they're basically the causes of, I guess, a break-even year. I'm hoping it'll be better next year. I think we've upped our margins. We've upped our stance on contractual positions, as we just spoke about. So I think it'll improve, but it's been a rocky road. Yeah.
I was just about to ask you, so how's the pushback been in relation to the if you want us, you have to pay us a little bit more?
Yeah, I think, look, and I don't want this to be an assault on our clients. I think it's been hard. It's a hard market for developers too. So developers have felt this in where they've bought a site, gone to market, sold apartments, and in the period for them selling the apartments and locking away a builder, the builder's numbers moved from what their cost plan. So they've had to go back to their customers, purchasers of units. I'm using Resi as an example, but and basically say you need to fork out more money if you want to keep your deposit. So they've had a lot of difficult conversations too on their end. Everyone's feeling this. I think our client, I think 80-90% of our work is repeat business. So our clients are understanding of the issues, and they know we're not gouging, that we're just dealing with the market as it is. I think the biggest issue for them is, are their jobs still feasible? Which is basically to say, have what people are willing to pay for, again, to use Resi as an example, has what people are willing to pay for a unit increased in line with the cost of construction increase? And if the answer is no, then unfortunately the job isn't feasible, and then they've got to sell the site. So I think they're understanding of the issues, and they're understanding that it's not just us, the whole building market is dealing with this. But yeah, there's difficult conversations because often it means that the job just doesn't stack up, which puts them in a tough position.
Yeah, they're exposed, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah,
They've got the dirt.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this comes back to, you know, what sort of development margin does a financier expect to fund a job? Because often they're being driven by their lending criteria. So if they have a 20% gross development margin hurdle rate, and our cost of construction rise has meant there's only 15% in it now, will a bank still fund that? And often the answer is no. They have quite strict rules. And, to go a level deeper, the big banks are regulated by APRA, who have certain rules around how much risk exposure they have to property. So yeah, there's systemic changes happening at the moment, which doesn't happen immediately.
Such a healthy conversation to have.
Yeah, it is.
It's one of the benefits of COVID, I think, or the consequences of COVID, is that finally we're having, respectful conversations, just like you've framed that whole thing in relation to the developers got it tough too. Sure. But it's just so important that everyone understands the position of the other. The financiers, the banks do have to sort of appreciate or understand the challenges that the developers are under. But then everyone's got to understand the banks are operating under a very strict regime in terms of APRA requirements.
Yeah, they are. They are. And I think as a nation, we benefited throughout the financial crisis that our banks were quite well regulated and that they didn't have as much systemic risk as in the US, where a lot of big banks fell over on the back of subprime mortgages. So, we're a participant in a big economic system, and I try not to be too try not to have the blinkers on and just complain about our problems, because everyone's dealing with things in their own way. But I think if we're going to keep building housing supply, and I think we're both millennial generation, or Gen Z border millennial. If there's going to be enough housing supply for us to be able, or for our generation to be able to afford houses, we've got to do something a little bit different as far as how, because at the moment there's just a lot of jobs that just aren't going ahead because they're just not feasible. And again, this leads back to governments getting more involved now with social housing.
There's always a lot of doom and gloom about that, about that housing, isn't it? I think whenever I talk to any of anyone around my age, they go, I'm never going to be able to get a house.
Yeah, I empathize. It's pretty tough. Unless you're a real go-getter and a saver, or unless you inherit generational wealth, it's going to be pretty tough for the next generations to buy a house. And again, I don't want to speak out of school. I'm not an economist, but I can't see how it's going to get easier when building new housing supply has gotten so much harder.
Yeah.
On a bright note, are there any projects that you're excited for coming up, or that you're looking forward to have completion reached, or like is there any like types or specific examples that you're really keen for?
Yeah. I mean, we have great projects all over town, a couple of big office jobs. So one with Cbus at North Quay will be a great job in completion, which I think Services Australia are going into. A couple office jobs around here, one with Deutsche Bank and Consprop. I like office building. It's a bit less stressful than resi building. I guess moving forward, there's a big rollout of Queensland Health projects. So hopefully we pick up some of that work, and a lot more social infrastructure, a lot more schools, as we spoke about earlier, a lot more modular, which, I as a representative of the owners, I like modular too, because we have more control over it. So it's been a good part of our business as far as profitability the past few years. And then, I mean, leading into the Olympics, there's going to be a lot to get done. This is the other elephant in the room, is as far as supply of labor. The amount of work that needs to get done, even if the private sector really dries up because jobs aren't feasible, there's so much work to get done. So we're going to be very busy. It's not to be too fear-mongering. There's a lot to be excited for. I'm sure it's going to be great in 2032, but before then, there's a lot to get done. So a lot of projects we're looking forward to.
It's almost like the different sectors are devouring each other when it comes to labour needs.
Definitely.
The resi sector's got huge needs. The commercial mixed retail sector's got huge needs, because I separate those out. The infrastructure, different types of people involved, but sometimes not. So, it's like, it's the challenge will be to getting enough skilled people either retrained locally, or people that we're currently in Australia or available, or bringing people in. That's the challenge. But then where they live, where they going to live?
No, I think there's at the very least there's going to have to be some interstate labor that comes up, and we're dealing with a few subcontractors from down south just to fill some gaps in Queensland. I don't think Sydney and Melbourne's going to be as hot. We're a national company. I don't want to be too Queensland centric, but it is the biggest part of our book. I think half of our revenue's in Southeast Queensland. But there's going to at least have to be some interstate migration. I think international migration's hard. It takes a while to onboard people. There are industrial relations concerns with just bringing people straight on. So, I don't know if migration's this magic spell that's going to fix everything. And like you said, migration has its own headaches as far as more pressure on housing.
I've got a cousin who's recruits trying to find. She's a head hunter for chefs. It's like you just can't. Chefs can make their own. Good chefs can name their own price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Because she's constantly overseas trying to organise people to come. And paying a fortune to get them across here.
It's still we're not the only.
We're not the only. When you think of it in terms of the skill shortage, I think we burrow down all the time. I think we're the only ones. No. Or you get out there and talk. There's skill shortages across a range of agriculture. Skilled. I'm talking about skilled.
I think some of it's generational. Like certainly when I was in high school, everyone who was doing okay at school was encouraged to go to uni and do a general degree, whether that's arts, business. If you didn't get into law or engineering, or a technical degree, you were sort of encouraged to just do a general one. So I don't think enough people have been encouraged to do trades or any sort of manual labor. I don't want to be too critical of my own generation, but I feel like our parents some who did those hard yakka jobs probably want a better life for their kids and say, no, go to uni. I'm paying all this money for your education. But I can't help but think that's contributed to the shortages, not enough. And I hope, I know Construction Skills Queensland and other bodies do a lot of work on this front, but we need more school leavers to want to do a trade. It's great money. It's rewarding work. If you're a chippy at the end of the day, you look at a house you've built, you smell timber in the morning. I think that lifestyle suits a lot of people. So we need to be encouraging school age people to consider it.
Great words.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you want to touch on?
No, I think we've gone around nicely. Anything you want to?
No, it's been, really pleasant conversation, and thanks very much for having me. But I guess it's not all doom and gloom. I hope we've been quite vocal in the press, not deliberately. We just get called by journalists.
Just being rude.
They call us, to be honest, and we again, to your point, Emily, about being open and transparent, we tell them what we think usually. But it's not all doom and gloom. We'll get through this, but it's going to be a rocky and interesting road right up until 2032 in Brisbane. That's my view anyway.
I admire your dad's, candor.
Yeah, that's good.
Because that opens up the conversation we've just had.
Sure.
You can't have a candid and honest conversation. Well, then how can you really impress upon the banks to sort of understand, push it all the way up? And then you've got to understand the bank's position. So it's a conversation which is just so important. And when people like you, or through your dad normally, is prepared to court the way he sees it, I just think it's just hallelujah.
Yeah, some honesty.
Some honesty. And as long as everyone's respectful and seeks to understand the other people's position, that's what we're trying to do here too.
Yeah.
Is that, really give good advice to a client in terms, one of the things is that you've got to try to understand the role of the person who might be opposing the client. So you walk in their shoes a little bit, and that means that you can give good candid advice to your client. Maybe sometimes it's a little bit like the advice they need to hear, not as opposed to the advice they want to hear. But to do that, you've got to understand the pressures that the other party's on. So that's all this part of this open dialogue, which I think is just so important, and that's what we're trying to do here.
No, it's fantastic. No, appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you very
it.
much. I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. The information we discussed today was just that, information only. It is not specific advice. If you take action following something you heard today, it is important to make sure you get professional advice about your unique situation before you proceed, whether that advice be legal, financial, accounting, medical or other advice. Please reach out to the Helix team if you have any questions or if there's another topic you'd like to explore. And if you know someone who might benefit from the show, remember to tell them about it or point them to our Instagram, Facebook or LinkedIn.